Long before money was invented, people living in tiny communities were getting along nicely with each other. Everyone made something, produced, and traded. Who gave what and who received what was generally kept in mind. In other words, at that time, there was a kind of mental accounting system. Everyone knew and remembered who would give what to whom. As communities grew and developed, the number of trades also increased significantly. People started producing not only for themselves, but also for the common good. On top of that, when rulers imposed taxes, things became even more complicated. Tracking who owed whom was almost impossible. A piece of paper saying, "You owe me this much," that is, a debt note, could have been a nice solution. But how would you trust such a note if you didn't know who wrote it? That's exactly why people started trading items like whale teeth that could be used as a kind of debt note. Thanks to these items, people could now trade even with strangers and even save these exchange tools to spend later. So both money and the concept of debt emerged at the same time. When people started using money to facilitate trade, whether hard shells, barley, feathers, or whale teeth, many characteristics of money became important. For example, carrying barley was difficult. It wasn't portable and wasn't durable because it spoiled quickly. Whale teeth couldn't be split, so they weren't divisible. Shells were so common that they were found almost everywhere, so they weren't scarce. Moreover, if the object representing money had no intrinsic value, like feathers, it was hard to trade with strangers. Another notable feature of money was that those with more money were powerful, and those in power could easily obtain even more money. Thus, kings and rulers came up with the idea of minting coins from valuable metals. They stamped the coins with a seal, guaranteeing their weight and value. Metal money met all the requirements of money. Since it had intrinsic value, it could also be used in trade with foreign communities. But the success of metal money also brought many problems. Rulers realized that they could slightly reduce the weight of coins and mix in lower quality metals, putting coins into circulation that were worth less than their face value. And this way, they could gain huge profits that affected both the economy and their own treasuries. Carrying large amounts of coins on themselves was very heavy and difficult. Therefore, the first Chinese rulers developed the idea of keeping their heavy coins in the palace and issuing debt notes written on paper for long-distance trade. The paper had no intrinsic value on its own, but people trusted it greatly because, at any time, they could exchange these papers for gold, silver, valuable metals, or the coins it represented. As trade grew, the idea of paper money gradually became widespread. But merchants and lenders were concerned about how easily money could be multiplied. Therefore, they tried to link the value of paper and metal money to gold. This created a standard measure between different currencies. This system continued for centuries, but the need for flexible exchange rates gradually became dominant, and from the early 1970s, the world had abandoned the gold standard. Today, the only thing that separates a banknote from any other paper is trust. Years ago, on the Pacific Yap Island, the closest thing to gold was rice stones. These stones were enormous in size and very heavy. When traders decided to collect taxes with rice stones, this made money universal and obligatory for everyone and put it under the control of those handling money. The most valuable rice stones were so heavy that people usually left them in one place and carried out trade verbally. Any trader who owned a rice stone could issue a debt note based on the value of the stone. This is how banking was born. When merchants started accepting these debt notes for taxes, it became impossible to control the amount of money in circulation. In the 20th century, economists argued that the amount of money in circulation directly affects economic power. It was very important for governments to try to control this, but it was not that easy, especially when most of the money was being produced and given to people by private lenders. In the 16th century, Spain brought an incredible amount of precious metals from its colonies. At first, this seemed like a dream. It should have definitely increased trade, but things did not go as expected. Merchants raised the prices of goods far above normal to match the new purchasing power. As a result, returning explorers were poorer than before, and those without the new gold were in much worse condition. Only those with debts benefited because their debts gradually lost value. This was the first example of the theory, too much money chasing too few goods increases prices. That is the concept of inflation. But of course, this could be balanced. If merchants produced more goods, or if people didn't spend money and saved cautiously, the circulation of money slowed down and the effect of inflation decreased. In the 18th century, the British required their American colonies to pay taxes in pounds and banned the colonies from issuing their own money. This meant that the colonies had to trade with England, otherwise they couldn't access British currency. According to Benjamin Franklin, the American War of Independence was caused by these unpaid high taxes and the compulsory trade. After winning the war, Americans were able to issue their own currency, the American dollar. Thanks to the country's universal trade network and reliable tax system, the dollar gradually became the most widely used currency in the world. Many countries, including England, started accumulating large dollar reserves. But this meant that England gave some of its power into American hands. By the 19th century, banking had become a respectable business. Banks easily made profit by paying low interest on deposits and charging high interest on loans. But then they realized that as long as depositors didn't all withdraw at once, they could lend much more money than they actually had in the vault. This is called fractional reserve banking. On rare occasions, if everyone tried to withdraw at the same time, a bank run would occur and lead to a strong economic crisis. To prevent this, governments guaranteed customer deposits, allowing banks to lend more than usual. By the 21st century, many banks had taken fractional reserve banking to advanced levels. They financed loans not just from deposits, but also from loans from other banks. These loans were often secured against packages of previous loans. When banks were suddenly attacked in 2007, for example Northern Rock, they didn't have the required money, and the effect was felt across all banks, not just one. After the 2008 crisis, to understand government efforts to control a global financial collapse, economists divided money into two types. 1. Bank money, created within the banking system, and 2. Universal money, created outside of the government system. When a bank issues a loan, it acquires a new deposit. This loan creates a private debt for the borrower. This is money created within the banking system. Governments can create new money by selling new bonds. These bonds enter the market as new assets, but there is no private debt in return. Instead, this money is added to the government debt. This usually makes up a small part of total money supply, but in a crisis it was used to buy and write off banks' unnecessary assets. In the end, the private sector maintained its wealth while the government supported the system through public debt. After the last traces of the gold standard disappeared in 1973, the world continued trading in US dollars, even though these dollars had no intrinsic value. The US government borrowed billions to rescue banks and revive the economy. Many economists predicted that this would lower the dollar's value, because printing more money than production normally leads to higher prices and depreciation of currency. But 6 years later, the dollar somehow remained strong. Why? Perhaps because the majority of wealth held by institutions and states was in dollars. People trusted the dollar, and since many others shared this trust, the dollar remaining strong became a collective belief. Once at the cutting edge of technology, minted coins and paper money are now used in only a fraction of transactions. Thanks to credit cards and electronic banking, large sums of money can be transferred in seconds. With digital technology, new currencies are emerging: Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. These digital currencies carry the familiar characteristics of money: secure against counterfeiting, durable, portable, divisible. They can even challenge the power of government-backed money. Until a government accepts taxes in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, these currencies are no different than worthless items. The sign that a new form of money has truly developed is when governments and banks attempt to keep it under their control. And if governments and banks continue to hold power over money, anyone using it will always ask, who will use this power and for what purpose?